Alright, I'm unmuting the mic now, just so everybody works. I don't have it pulled up. Yeah, I'm just saying I'm unmuting the mic now.
Yeah, we're still. Sure.
Yeah. I guess I'll read it.
But you can if you want.
Light in this room?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm sorry. This is
Glare shield.
Alright.
Also, probably just make it hotter because it'd be like more heat and shit.
Sunlight.
Alright.
There's a lot of
Mic's
props
unmuted.
intersecting.
So everybody knows.
Does everyone have what they need?
Hold on.
Need one IC set.
Yeah, I'm ready. Sorry.
Oh, you all good?
Over.
Alright.
The United States should legalize marijuana in the United States because prohibitions have a disparate impact. Advantage 1 is disparate impact. Racially neutral drug law enables extreme bias and policing strategies. Disparate impact challenges are key. Johnson, 7. The court has played a central role in the war on drugs and commentators not so far to contend. The court has dealt with jurisprudence of drugs and absolutism in Washington versus State. The court held a violation of equal protection required a facially neutral policy be maintained with discriminatory intent, not simply a result of discriminatory impact is for minimal barrier to equal protection. Political possibilities exist for halting disparate impact of the war on drugs. When it comes to changing the Julia case, maybe the exceptional absent of monumental for defenders will not be able to be vindicated. Equal protection law is woefully inadequate to ensure fairness for the run-of-the-mill defendants in a drug case. Disparate impact cases are a key side of resistance to discriminatory jurisprudence. Traditional legal strategy fail because of a facially neutral post-EAF makes race an essential element of legal decision-making, spills over to social consensus. Span 10. The more realistic hope is that the U.S. culture has a chance for achieving equality less than willing to adopt every human strategy that will force its behavior to transcend racialization recognition of disparate impact as a cognizable form of discrimination constitute a sensible strategy. Such recommitments precisely what the court seems bent on preventing. The court has recognized subtle unconscious form of discrimination, but rather they remedy those issues that they have held that discrimination is beyond the racial-conscious remedies. Racial-conscious remedies provide the only realistic methods of neutralizing entrenched discrimination. They limit the remedies identified like as prohibited remedy for embedded inequalities power of embedded discrimination. Illustrated the court held that New Haven utilized this result has never been validated. The the court display deferences precisely because whites outperform minorities, because whites outperform the examples have been measured equalities relevant to merit-based which the only reason the court was able to disregard evidence is that white performance in the way that there was a way that the court expected. We will never be able to achieve equality simply through an act of will. We do have it within our character pre-committed due to constraints of collective behavior. The second order value lies in the variety that allocative inequality. So the result of enduring historical discrimination, the interaction between equal protection and disparate impact is potentially the potential for changing our understanding of the way to reveal the inadequacy of the individualized model of recommitment. It's impossible for policymakers of the future to bind policymakers of the present. It is difficult to imagine how discrimination can be ever overcome without distraction that forces to engage and be recognized that the legal legitimacy of disparate impact might as well serve as a strategy. Marijuana legalization is a starting point and an essential step towards dismantling the war on drugs writ large. Franklin, 14, Obama acknowledged the prohibition of the fairly enforced the war on drugs. As criminalization, legalization, marijuana is one step toward ending that prohibition is one of the most effective things. The change will have to measurably impact on people of color. The people of color rest have been devastating. The legalization made for them. They tend to feel superior privilege as much. Others remember this change is nothing. Believe sense of the connection between decriminalization and the profound difference because of ambiguity with decriminal cops. Our still rest use of the Colorado in the industry is above. We're able to see the improvements in the problems that were blamed on marijuana, but the other fact of the consequences of prohibition, costs of disparate drug enforcement are huge. Reinforced recidivism destroys access to education, employment. Legalization is decidedly better. Dyson and Burnett. 14. Marijuana penalties never creates a gateway to institutional happens perceptions, real consequences needed on unjust sentencing, disparate floods are legal to disparities in sentencing. Every habit black community sentences have been captured after causing loss of jobs, homes, ability to attend and schools resort. Reports of the black or the residents are more likely to be arrested for the DC to decriminalize the additional reform should be include special roof of marijuana for employment, drug testing, cost ensuring the new marijuana economy benefits in the communities covered by a prohibition. A structural approach to understanding discrimination is critical. Individual and psychological framing fails to recognize the effects of institutional inertia legal change, provides a mechanism for conscious erasing that as distinct material benefits, contrary inequality. Green. 3. A structural disparate treatment theory would permit plaintiff to challenge particular organizational systems structural counteracting from disparate impact theory that issues the particular approach for a number of reasons. The theory of discrimination that focus on discriminatory purposes would provide the empathy for redress discrimination that's not result in materially adverse decision. The structural theory would direct conversation towards subtle forms of discrimination, emphasizing institutional as well as individual aspects. The legal debate would again devote on systemic causal effects and whether other sides seen as personal conflict litigants would benefit from an analytical theory offering value structural account. The theory of structural disparate treatment would generate contextualized multifaceted problem solving. Same cases brought to the challenge institutional structure mark a beginning of the process of the adequate legal structure and consistency on uncertainty will amply impede potential for prerogatives only recognized for the role of organization who will be able to realize the possibilities offered by we cannot afford to continue with discrimination exclusively as an individual problem. Legal demands for accountability discrimination can reconstruct law as a tool for genuine justice. Turning power against itself destroys violent forms of liberalism. Brandon Ridgwick. 8. The plaintiff's word accounting reveals the legal realities of slavery endured across time. This present press connection makes the contemporary demands clearly accountable the case of the functions as an ethical discourse that directly challenge legal reasoning with the law's narrow static legal imagination creates legs of poverty and transform active subject and properties of the object legal creations develop the results of historical conditions, especially economics and moves that made the enslaved property were interconnected in the law. Legal racism only been explicitly engaged in law in small ways in law. A small group has pushed back against dominators, the call to preventing health is a call to responsibilities way to connect responsibility to the continuing material benefits labor with the corporation revealing the greater property personhood commodity demanding an account of claimants are demonstrating the material and symbolic articulation at the heart of the law. The demand for accounting is called for justice at the level within your materiality. Legal scholars use the law as a logic against all the potential for law is a competent interpretation of the past with the creative and doing incorporation of new circumstances. Hope it is law will include different readings of history, time, and responsibility, imagination, so far as to disallow recognition of the harms of the past. Another kind of legal imagination could recognize these claims and reclaim an entirely new history for the law. And the tech resolution recognize the recognition of some sort of time that is operating would provide a significant move in the law that would effectively undo liberal logic assumption upon which the legal system is based. Macro level political reform proves the importance of political contestation only, and why not? 13. There is a little sense of the way frame changes as the end of ways. They dismiss important rearrangements of merely destruction. If they meant that the U.S. is contradictory, we agree if we mean the people have no right to no power. We disagree. It would be easy to conclude why dominance has been unchanging. Arranged conditions have been changed. They have set the powerful democratic forces in motion. These transformations result of unprecedented mobilization, contingency, segregation, and forces. The Grahamsky insists the reform cannot immediately step out further. Victories can take place on the terrain of the state and the immediate level of social interaction. They facilitate the democratic gains, but also political advances. Then by no means do we think that the flows forward movements was unmitigated. Yes, the racial categories can be precisely the absence of careful approach can lead to racial lumping. Essential if you can release the systemic racist model does not inform concrete analysis of the issues. It's important to understand how groups are differently racialized. They fail to examine how racially subordinate groups interact and influence boundaries and conditions of practice. We still want to acknowledge that blacks can be catching healthy. And then for all the horse that the new Jim Crow represents, these practices are not intellectual, not resistance, not future legal skills are useful. Masuda 14. We need to revive the notion of lawyer social critic. That their face do not say with importance yet we have no backups to reclosures. That there is one model the constitutional. So experimentally, there are too many lawyers fail to understand the law as it comes over the human hand. We do not legal because people use it, shaped it, and sued. It is much better than private fights. Certainly, absolutely, we don't want to see decision making to the individual benign nature. Law is a tool. Law is a superstructure that can create humanizing effects. The location structure that contradiction can result in use of victories. What happens if legal fights matters and can make our lives significantly better. Some of them have students never practice law graduates. We're running health programs. None of these lawyers are doing traditional practice, but everyone is using a lawyer skill set to do vital work for swayed allies, manipulate rules, and law to meet the needs of the people they serve. Advantage 2 is the war on drugs. U.S. participation in the war on drugs drives major cycle of destruction that cause rampant environmental and violent effects from Smith, Hooks, and Langenfeld. 14. We documented with the military's war on drugs, the U.S. involvement includes support for human mitigation, costs, logistical support, catastrophic versus the collision of multiple casualties playing out in the global south. We situated travel social with those struggling 60 times the drug production has resulted in escalation of environmental devastation and commodity chains and including introduced demands from these powerful actors disrupting environmental changes to generate revenue. Military forces pursue unsustainable production. The U.S. was pursued directly and indirectly. The conflict heightening the scale of the use also played a role by providing military and participating in drug eradication. The resulting degradation, unstable cultivation, the conflict harm, non-combatants are in the crossfire. This combines to accelerate deforestation. The U.S. amplifies these dynamics. The U.S. commitment to escalating the field of human suffering and standard in the context of these disorganized skirmish. The civilian population often differently increasing rape, kidnapping, and coercion contributed. That is spillover effects on marginal population. CTC 11 creating the prohibiting a commodity creates profit for criminal opportunity pushing civilized into the illicit committed target already fragile. Fails to negative and then falls hardest on more and more emotionalized, including indigenous population. I think young people and women the same consequences are replicating the drug and transit region. The war on drugs is contributing to violence, stemming the control difficulty with market corruption, further undermines governance and interventions, precipitates the violence in which cartels fight back with ever increasing ferocity fighting. In the long term, and yet once again, traumatize population farmers earn about 1% of the overall income they face, while to preface and have limited access to credit encourages their problems of forward facing poor farmers and often overlooked causes the negative impact on the environment. Excuse me. Resulting from aerial spraying, the so-called balloon effect, the war on drugs result in a number of health harms burst, level of the use of harms has surprised and fall who marginalized community their epidemics and HIV, hepatitis B and C. Among those who invent drugs, federal action legalizing marijuana is key to move away from prohibition. U.S. action creates consensus and bandwagon of wider reforms. Wild 13. One sensible first step is for national government to encourage other governments to experiment. This will undermine the criminal market and security allow for other nations to learn from the application for this successful speaking says it is reduced, it is precluded by the sake of social society, and also tend to consolidate to illicit drug those pertaining to progressive activities. Difficult not to give credence to marijuana being acceptable. It has been by far the most widely used and produced of the community could reach a consensus about the noxiousness of any drug policy. Marijuana represents a really simple negative change that takes more many across the U.S. calls. We will consider benefits for the rest of the world. It's no surprise that the call for maintenance of the prohibitive policy resulting in the international community following. If the U.S. leads to follows, that leads to call for development of more power drug policy. Majority of the international community will also find a moderate approach could also act as a catalyst for transformation. The is about addressing the root of the war on drugs. Then the federal government must remove marijuana from its list of criminally banned substance. Discussions of the drug war require policy scrutiny. Stairs 96. Legalization is not an option that lends itself to simplistic debate. It requires dissection and scrutiny. There's not even a commonly accepted lexicon for terms that allow for intellectually rigorous research. The real debate that acknowledges complexity and uncertainties is long overdue. Not only would that dissuade flippant assertion that you permitted previous days, but also would stimulate a larger and equally critical assessment of current drug control program. Legalization can remove significantly reduce crime that can change cause of greatest concern to crime, corruption, and violence that attend the operation of illicit markets.
Can I take this in here? I'll be only to say that.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. Okay.
Okay. You good?
Yeah.
You were coughing a little bit. I just want to make sure you're ready for this.
Yeah, you're good.
Alright. Why did you choose to disclose a new app?
What's up?
Why did you choose to break a new app?
Because we have a bunch of apps that we want to read.
Just because you had a bunch of apps you wanted
Yeah,
to
I've been
read?
reading new apps every day.
We also haven't read this one before.
Yeah, but why couldn't you read your old debate? Oh, yeah.
Because we want to talk about it. We want to
We've
talk
been
about this one.
reading new AFSOL tournament against everyone.
Okay, just
It's
read
the
the
NDT
app.
round.
Alright.
We all
Can everyone smoke weed after the app?
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like
Anybody.
probably not children. for
Yeah, I mean,
sure,
like people
but-
would probably like the app legalization removes criminal penalties. We would say regulations would probably be a result of that.
What are those regulations?
So an example would be a good example is like kids could not smoke weed. People under the age of 18, I think would be a good example. People who are illicitly growing
Illicit
marijuana.
growing. What is illicit growing?
There would be people who are growing marijuana outside of what a regulatory regime is set up.
So like if I have my trap house, I can't grow weed in my trap house no more?
So not necessarily. It's not like you aren't allowed to own like a marijuana plant, but it's like if there's a drug cartel that has a giant illegal growth farm in the middle
I'm
of
not
the
talking
national
about the
forest.
cartel.
No, I know.
to-
Well, that would probably be
I'm talking
legal.
about
That's
trap house.
No, I know. That's probably legal.
Alright, trap house is legal?
Yeah, legal. Why
But
not?
you said cartels aren't?
Yeah, I mean marijuana. Yeah, I mean in the context of this, marijuana that's produced in Mexico would not be legal.
So does marijuana not be in Mexico? Okay, so
Yeah, I mean, that's
Mexican
where we
trap
get a lot of
house
marijuana.
can't grow weed. What's
Yeah.
what then? Okay, in that case, why is the U.S. key? What stops like I don't know Saudi Arabia from not legalizing weed? What stops like
Yeah, the
cartel
wild,
intervention
yeah, the
from not
wild
legalizing
evidence
weed?
from the second advantage is, I think, is the card you want to look at. It says that in the status quo, the United States has an outsized role in the current international prohibition regime against drugs, and that if the United States were to take a leadership role and pursue a more moderate drug control strategy, that would change people's minds. Other countries obviously have
That's
prohibition
fine,
regimes.
Andy. I have a question about your Green 3 evidence. It talks about this portion that's not Green, Jurassic 6 evidence. This unknown portion in text that refers to like the Fugitive Slave Act. What is that in relation to? Like the Fugitive Slave Act and the correction.
Sorry,
of
which
enemy?
card?
It's the Jurassic 6 piece of evidence. It's like
If I type in fugitive slave, will
yeah,
will
sure.
it come up? Okay. Yeah. Van Ridgwick? Yeah. What
Okay.
about it?
So
What do you want me to explain the content
yeah,
of the card?
does it
or-
relate to that particular portion? Actually,
Yeah.
you can just do it real quick because I have one more question.
Yeah, so the Van Ridgwick card says that this is in the context of people who brought a suit for reparations against corporations who are benefiting from the material legacy of slavery. This evidence says that the Fugitive Slave Act is a good example of people translating economic concerns, i.e. Slavery, into transforming people from subjects
last
into
thing,
objects.
your only and why not evidence talks about Gramscian politics. Does the affirmative define its relation to the law as a Gramscian politics?
Not necessarily, no.
Then what is the politics of the affirmative?
I mean, I don't think we have like a meta structure
So
of
you
politics.
won't-
We
you-
said
you
that
read-
it is.
you read a new app and you won't even defend at least the Gramscian portion of your art.
Our
We-
app is
we
not
don't have a
Gramscian
Gramscian
politics.
portion.
But
You're
you're
just
only
a-
analysis. That's how we should relate to race.
No,
race
No, that's
today.
the opposite of what that card says.
Alright. Okay.
free dialectically.
I don't know. You got a problem with that?
I think they're gonna go the case of just, yeah.
One case.
Is there one of the pages you would prefer it on, or does
Also,
it?
if we cannot follow this document on the shit, because we don't got paper, we can't read our properly, that'd be tight.
What's that?
Not you, you're fine.
Sorry, could you say what you said again?
Oh, what, which thing, the thing that I said?
I think you said something to them about dot font.
Oh, no,
document.
could you not follow their shit while we're debating, because we are on the right?
So he's making a request and ask to read the speech text during the speech.
Yes, or current cross-exes, or does something like that. Appreciate it.
Everyone good?
You good?
A interpretation, they should have disclosed their B. Violation should vote negative. They have weaponized their privilege as a method of winning debates that's only available to those racialized as white within academic spaces. Peterson and 14. Most studies of racism and racial inequality studies have relied on positive model science that took this project research to generalize and mobilize monolithic claims of whiteness are not only racially dangerous and counterproductive, they can be profited in bad faith because whiteness is morphing property that is fluid and evasive. There's a contextual heterogeneity to whiteness that is generous and appears to be simultaneously everywhere and then nowhere. The secret of whiteness is that it has no, that the truth lies in rituals and sustains a certain to this countless logic. It is in fact nothing but its very practices. And second, this is equivalent of locking the doors and clutching your purse or crossing the street and to secure themselves from blackness with the secret of deceptive arguments. That's PRL 101 and 3. Damned if you do, damned if we don't. Y'all read framework and damn specific policy proposals but hide behind arbitrary and self-serving debate norms because it's new. It's not justifications for non-disclosure. And 4, no offense, voluntary pre-round disclosure to racialized black and red bodies. And
It's good.
it's good. All that's good. Case. The idea that weed legalization is a step in the right direction with race whitewash is a more insidious form of institutional discrimination and compromising way of racism and criminal justice system don't buy the we are starting point for change arguments. Legalization is not an effective starting point for challenging large institutional racism. Take Taylor and Sawyer 13. Legalization might only harden the racial disparities in arrest, reducing the penalties white youth, but not reducing them for black and Latino youth. Marijuana legalization cannot be made into a civil rights issue. Greater reforms, greater efforts must be spent into challenging racism broadly in the American legal system. It plays into a neoliberal agenda that supports market forces for a better outcomes for disadvantaged minorities. It feeds the fantastical belief that minorities on the road with that government is going to improve their greater economic job process and economic disadvantaged schools and close down opportunistic bills that spring up to segregated communities. Legalization is no panacea for unemployment, poverty, and homelessness among blacks and Latinos and American Indians. While advocates of legalization like to claim increases in social services, the poor community would accompany legalization. There is no indication that the same federal government would in fact complete couple legalization would increase spending on anti-drug abuse and public health programs. And your faith in legal reform can account for anti-black co-optation. Our paradigmatic analysis of the slave relation to the law stops the ongoing erasure and sacrificing of black bodies in the assumption of progress, raising and forging. For only when operations that dialectic between different racial groups competing definitions of CRT state all argue that the race is solely a process of racial domination. Race does not exist outside of racism. The difference of position precludes Omia when not posing assertion that people of color have a lot of power in production of racial meaning and people of color can practice racism well. Race was socially constructed by whites and for that through material exploitation. RSC's assertion that people of color can be racist against whites is akin to arresting a woman for wrestling her purse back home. The justice requires accounting for the actor's relative power to the entire history of their relationships. CRT avoids RSC's de facto assumption that U.S. history inevitably marches towards racial justice. The reversibility of political changes and empirical question that RSC forecloses to asserting some of the major economic reforms have 1960s have proved irreversible. Ironically, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 is a primary example of irreversible victories and a refutation of the interest convergence here occurring less than 6 months after the publication of Omiwa's assertion to nullify the Voting Rights Act. Omiwa want to argue that people of color's possession of political rights evidence of march-up of the Jim Crow era to formal equality back then gained voting rights and Reconstruction that were subsequently revoked in the practice for nearly a century. Nothing guarantees the history of granting rights to only repeal them, not to repeal the people of color would not have the autonomous power to guarantee the political rights, and if and when whites decide to rescind them. So as long as whites retain the power to determine people of color's rights, there can be no assurance that whites will not use their instrumental control to at the same time to retract those rights. RC sidesteps that question, claiming deeper issues that
that naked racism had produced in Jim Crow only highlights RSC's inconsistent theorization of state autonomy. The process of imagining a different world in which people of color are historical contemporary decision makers of the U.S. are required, implicitly theorizing the state as it is, offers some scholars new opportunities to address questions of race because it specifies the basis of the state power, the level of autonomy more clearly and consistently than existing theories. And emancipation through the affirmative reforms is a ruse and highlight that mask what freedom is and what freedom isn't. Hartman in 97. As rights bearers, we're the newly emancipated enacting role they can never authentically occupy, although assertions of free will, singularity, autonomy, and consent necessarily obscure relations of power and domination. The genealogy of freedom, to the contrary, discloses the intimacy of liberty, domination, and subjecting the individual to the hard lifestyle of scrutiny, reveals a subject tethered by various orders, constrained, obscured by the figure of the self-possessed, lurking behind the disembodied, self-possessed individual, reflections up to the embodied and the income, the strange substantiation that captured into volitional subject, into chattel, into proprietor, circumscribed body of backless, into disembodied and abstract universal seems improbable, if not impossible. Is not the free will of the individual measured precisely the exercise constraint and autonomy determined by the capacity to participate in relations between all that only fettered by the subject? Does he esteem what remains the barbaric whip, only acts as to supplement the identity of the emancipator as rights bearer must be considered in regard to the process of domination, exploitation, and subjection, rather than banality that desperately strive to establish slavery as a prehistory of man. And the planned sequel policy can't resolve racist attitudes, profiling, and wrongful convictions, assure that black people will be disproportionately incarcerated. Full turn 12. Racial profiling resulted in a disproportionate number of blacks being arrested, incarcerated. Blacks were arrested and convicted arbitrarily. Disproportionate racial profiling is not limited to be found everywhere. Blacks live, blacks everywhere, and are arrested and wrongfully convicted for crimes they did not commit. These incidents represent numerous undocumented examples where law-abiding black citizens were singled out of race based on racial profiling, which disproportionately impacted blacks represented in the prison population. You can't dismantle empire first without combating anti-black colonialism, sexism, and sex. The United States have long considered black people to be weapons of mass destruction. Racial profiling cut its fiercely several years prior to the passage of the USA Patriot Act. The genealogy and nefarious police practices charted through beyond the 20th century, reaching back to the ethos of colonial state patrols. Racial profiling is a sine qua non of modern policing. The social control and crisis management of black populations always figured centrally, perhaps especially in matters of emancipation and racial equality, have by no means enjoyed the focus of the debate. It has only required the presence of this so-called problem people dwelling in absence of human presence, rendering the black to the object of dispossession par excellence. Structures indelibly the historical proliferation of modern consumption of sovereignty that now dominate political discourse globally and provide the crucial frames for intelligence for both imperialism and anti-imperialism, with blacks barred by definition from the very notion of the sovereign. Those not marked by material and symbolic stigma of slavery have exclusive and positive capacity to debate about sovereignty. And our alternatives of politics of refusal to affirm Rule 10 and 7. Slavery is the great level of the black subject positionality. The black subject does not generate historical categories of entitlement, sovereignty, and immigration. For the record, we are off the map. The chart civil society semiotics outside the articulation of hegemony. Our presence works back upon the grammar of hegemony and threatens with incoherence black society of absolute dereliction and functions as a map for which gratuitous violence in which civil society is possible, those for which violence is contingent. For a truly revolutionary movement should grasp the invitation to assume the positionality of subjects of social death. They have been and remain today even in the most anti-racist movements invested elsewhere, such as prison abolition and movement invested elsewhere, usually anti-black, meaning that it will not deal with that the condition of possibility, a gesture of resistance function as a negative dialectic, a politics of refusal, a refusal to affirm, a program, a complete disorder. A few so-called radicals desire to be embraced and elaborated by the disorder, then the incoherence of blacks. If through the stages of paralysis they try to do the work of prison abolition, the work will fail, for it is always a work from a position of coherency, positionality, the black subject gesture to disconfiguration of civil society, the black subject that beckons with the incoherence of civil war, a war that reclaims black conscience as a positive value with a politically enabled sight of absolute dereliction is a scandal that rends civil society asunder. Civil war becomes the unthought but never forgotten understudy of hegemony. It is a black sector awaiting in the wings or in this antagonism that cannot be satisfied by a reform and reparation, but must nonetheless be pursued to the death. And prisons will increase the duration of prisoner sentences to make up for decreased criminals, Harney and Gleisman in 12. The potential conflict of interest posed by private prisons can also arise to influence prison staff to have the length of time inmates spend behind bars. Marks on the inmate records may lead to a form of proceedings that can reduce the chances of early release or extend his or her sentence. The private prison company directly benefit from long periods of stay. And the roots of the prison-industrial conflicts are based on the reform Rodriguez intended. The prison-industrial conflict, the emergence over the last few decades of a multiple symbiotic institutional relationships are dynamically linked. Private business and government state apparatus and projects that multiply human immobilization and imprisonment. The prison industrial complex is a system situated at the intersection of government and private interests that uses prison as a solution to social and political economic problems, located within an accelerating political and geographic displacements and globalization, including public policy, legislative bodies, electoral and lobbying apparatus, the medical and architectural construction industries, and other various hegemonic institutional forms. The reform of the prison, it required its own expansion and bureaucratic multiplication rather than decarceration. The reformist outrage yielded to the piecemeal the corporation and medical facilities and staff into prison protocols and so on. The prison industrial complex is one of the most significant reformist achievements in U.S. history. It's not simply a perverse social project of self-identified reactionaries conservative. Its roots, its substance is fundamentally located in the American liberal progressive impulse towards reforming institutionalized state violence rather than abolishing it. The fundamental epistemology is 1, the social order, 2, the survival of civil society, 3, the nation-building project, the democratic conspiracy, at least apparent corruption, contradictions, and systematic brutalities are ultimately reformable, redeemable, and forgivable. I have 30 seconds. Want to give me anything else? All right. The gratuitous violence of the state outweighs any impacts if you win or link the vote negative, recognizing or asking the man's the only asking the man will center night. The violence of this middle passage in the slave seek to acknowledge the accumulation of inability to recombine and reenact the horrors about the succeeding generation. The back of violence is both gratuitous and is not contingent upon transgression and hegemony, civil society, instructional, the positions black outside the blacks outside the humanity, civil society, simultaneously arena the ontological status of humanity, life itself, wholly dependent upon civil society's repetition, compulsion, the frenzy for fragmented machinations of the civil society, reenacts gratuitous violence upon the black and civil society might know itself in the domain of human generation after generations. Can I see this? There we go.
You good to go? Okay, so I guess we got a little bit of this across the 1AC. We've been reading New Apps the whole tournament. What is the threshold for disclosure that would meet your interpretation?
You could have actually did pre-round voluntary disclosure. Your shit's already on the wiki. You do open source, and our argument is in the context of black and red bodies that having a static position performance in your debate space is good for us to engage some of the presumptions behind your original ask.
So I guess why is that tied to a disclosure rather than us just defending the 1AC throughout the
problem with your particular gesture towards marijuana is not only is it strategic, but it ultimately acknowledges you can be complicit in the ways in which your anti-blackness could also be affected in other areas of the resolution, i.e. like your gambling app, which we prep for, and have sweet links for it that we could not read. Because you find to enact the fluidity of
whiteness. So I guess that, right, which didn't answer my question, which was why does not just defending the 1AC throughout the debate solve?
Oh, it doesn't defend it throughout the debate, doesn't solve because you have already performed that fluidity.
How do you know that's why we read a new app?
Because literally the only way, and that's also that's like the norm. The norms argument you're making also applies to the rest of the debate community. What's the best internal link turns to engaging anti-blackness? Obviously marijuana.
Why is it
not necessarily engaging?
Why is it a bad thing to have that debate?
Because it's one that implicates you in your whiteness and your ability to adapt to these conversations, Andy. Your adaptation is a strategic one because it doesn't allow you to be implicated in the other ways of the topic. You can do this to anyone else. We're just saying that you can't do it to us.
Okay, so debate should be really easy for you all.
It's not debate should be really easy for you, or debate should be a hard activity. You might have some real hard, good reasons. Like, yeah, so why can't you just say online gambling even affects black people too? Like the distinction, the petty distinction just to pick marijuana.
I feel like that's just as arbitrary. That's fine. I want to ask about some other stuff. Is it good that people can be arrested for marijuana in the status quo?
Yeah, we don't say that that's good, but your app doesn't resolve that. That's the first argument.
That's a separate question. My question is it good that people can be arrested for marijuana in the status quo?
That doesn't matter because your app still allows people to be arrested.
Okay, so I'm going to take that as no. That is not good. All right, so I want to talk about some of these more foundational claims. Your Hartman as well as Wilderson evidence makes some, I mean the Wilderson 9, Wilderson 7 both make that the fungibility of blackness sort of undergirds civil society. My question is how do your authors come to that conclusion?
Here's a different, okay, so you're going to try to go for this sort of speed of falsifiability shit, but the argument
I just want to know where that comes from. Is it an empirical?
Anti-blackness is not a historical trajectory, but a paradigm that is able to repeat itself across time and space. That's what it uses by petition. So for example, the Manichaeism of the Crusades, which enabled
where did that come from?
I'm trying to fucking tell you. The Manichaeism of the Crusades that came from the binary between Christianity and Arab were also inscribed in the white over black binary that is then extended and attached to the Moorish people who were also part of the Islamic creation. Then it got extended to the replication of Christianity.
So it's a historical claim.
It's not fucking historical because if it was historical, there were trans structures. That's what we say. It's paradigmatic. It can be both and, yo.
Okay. Are you proud?
Yeah.
Can I ask you what the other half of the both and paradigmatic in the sense that it's historical and?
All right. So for example, that's why the Gracie evidence is also real good about that, right? We can have those contingent changes over time, but they can still repeat the intensification of anti-black violence because it's not just a historical thing.
Right, but what is that other thing?
The other, what?
What is the other half of the equation?
Oh, and that's what I'm saying, it's a paradigmatic question.
What is?
Paradigm means like worldview, like Thomas Kuhn, all that kind of shit. Our argument is that when paradigm is attached to the knowledge practices and the values that we garner in civil society, such as like freedom, justice, emancipation, flexibility of the law, all those things depend on a notion of blackness as pathological, blackness as abject, blackness as a, etc. We also have the argument that that's not the case because those are scriptures that are imposed by civil society,
I think that clears
not necessarily alternative, which says that we should affirm the slave's ability to destroy that state.
All right.
Thank you.
You're good.
Yeah, you can.
Oh, can I get that top sheet back? Yeah. That one.
Your cross there.
Yeah. Thanks.
I'm looking for the legalization part. Do you also have that one?
No, it should be in there.
I think we don't have anything else.
I'm thinking about the next step right now. I could do that. I might do that.
All right.
Are you good?
716.
I don't think I've ever debated at Georgetown to you. I think like the one time like some crazy stuff went down. Yeah, it was at UT and there was that big drama. Yeah. I still don't know how I feel about that.
Give me a few more seconds.
Good?
Yeah, it was like 16 more seconds, I think.
Yeah.
I know you probably. Sneaky.
So 7 minutes.
Yep. There you go.
You sending anything?
Nope.
Close chapter.
That's messed up. You know my money back. And they were like, yeah, you've actually overdrafted quite a few times over the years. So no.
Right. The new F's, T argument, and then case.
completely arbitrary for what marijuana apps afford new advantages, and the plan isn't the same as a new app, but it also raises the question, what innovation is okay? Are new plans bad, new advantages, new cards, all the above counter-interpretation? We don't have to disclose our app. They link. Their arguments are different now than they were at the beginning. The argument development naturally results in newness. The flippant and arbitrary nature of their accusation resembles the racist justifications for marijuana criminalization. New apps are bad, but new cards are fine. New advantages are bad, but new arguments and two and are fine. This is the incoherent, disparate logic of drug policy. The entire point of the app is to level the playing field by standardizing legal and acceptable practices. There, here's evidence about why research making monolithic claims about whiteness is bad. No, we don't do that, nor is there a reason to reject us as people. Their argument is a hidden motive thesis. They are assuming we read a new app for a racist reason, not a strategic one. This is an irrefutable ad hominem. You should reject Jorgensen. Negative factors. The negative factors supported by the conspiracy argument. The argument cast out the motive behind. The opponent's claim these arguments good. He classifies them on the puppet. The argument does not accuse him directly, but assesses that he is a tool in the hands of conspiracy. What makes them dubious? They are impossible to refute and can be effective in front of partisan audiences. They criminalize new apps. Voting on this argument requires you to perform legal discovery for everything we've read all year. This is symptomatic of the status quo approach to both marijuana and race. New apps are productive. They deepen our understanding of the topic and are crucial to investigate complex issues like criminalization from multiple angles, revising arguments between them. So they better respond to opponents' strategy, creates more depth and research, so that every debate isn't an exact repeat. They conflate individual perspectives with group identity. Coding arguments based on race reinforces academic exclusion. Brubaker in 2000 specifying that identity is fluent when sound resolved. The problem of trying to word yields little more than a subjective facts, more fluid crystallization, but begs the question of why one should use the term to extend all these people always have particularity, self-understanding trajectories, and those informing claims that make use assume such particularity under the undifferentiated rubric of identities that its form to its form is what an attempt to subsume it under universal categories constructing particularity and identity terms to extract the political points away from the possibilities of action other than the used word imputed of them imputably showed identity. The case. The role of the ballot is to evaluate the enactment plan. There is a conceded impact. The war on drugs leads to massive cycles of violence and environmental destruction. State degradation, aggressive policies are based on an institutional commitment to enforcing prohibitions globally. The impact is on massive civil conflicts. They have conceded that the legalization of marijuana would lead to the end of the global war on drugs because it makes countries rebut their prohibitions separately. The material effect of marijuana prohibitions are destructive, minority, low-income communities, predatory, policing policies, trap offenders into a cycle of recidivism which destroys access to educational employment opportunities and more broadly to structural violence based on the sheer number of prison each year. Legalization breaks the consensus on prohibition has a bandwagon effect that was above. Legalization is good, prohibition is clearly worse. They have not read a single piece of evidence specific to the mechanism of the affirmative. Any law that would exist after legalization that leads to a racially disparate criminalization perspective would be rejected. Applying a disparate impact standard to marijuana policy when marijuana policy creates a doctrinal shift away from colorblind and colorblind jurisprudence which solves all of their cases of law and forces a behavioral constraint on judges that trickles down to everything from policing practices to housing law. This is not a one-shot reform, but a mechanism that changes the character of the legal system. It also changes the psychology of race because it forces a recognition of racial bonds and foregrounds racial focus in the unconscious. That's our Van Rijswijk evidence. Our Dyson evidence says that their authors assume stuff like decriminalization, which does retain penalties, but not full legalization at the federal level. It's not perfect, but prohibition reverses any possible benefit hierarchy. In 14, the war on drugs historically targeted Black Americans' race has always been the elephant in the room. Colorado Washington began to take flight. Alexander noted the inescapable undertow of race war on drugs is felt objectively making drug crime the primary from the preoccupation of law enforcement. I feared that the threat that by going east out, we find the squid on the red scheme and systematic from that predations and the intact family and community destruction on the family community destruction on which the war threats about the nation's popularity is little based in science and rest for possession can start a chain reaction that leads to the first to directly reduce employability can almost a paid conflict along the way the government would naturally charge and prohibit and appropriate for such activities process which would go a long way not only to offering crucial drug counseling and treatment services but to relieving the racial and social economic pressures that produce the preconditions for drug abuse in the first place. Their omit and win-out argument. We obviously don't think that history is a march toward racial justice. Omi and Winna don't say that's the case, but there are possibilities to be able to change certain laws and social practice that aren't fundamentally immutable. New movements are reforming racially and just laws in a meaningful manner using intersectional approaches. All of their evidence indicts the legal equality reforms in the civil rights era, which is not the app spade. And searching critical thoughts I've been describing insanity. Now what the laws is about self, but how operations and distributed life changes are village of the village of back cooperation total social movement critical intersection tools are making men activists are making men that include ending immigration enforcement abolishing policing and prison fees demand through a different relation to law reform strategies that then the national narrative about law reform then the law reform suggests legal equality and victories are being expressed as symbolic declarations law reform this we might be used as tactical transformative focus on interventions that materially response without inadvertently expanding the harmful systems in the name of reform. One examples of campaign against Jane and in Oakland comprising organizations focus on police violence like economic justice enforcement use of violent immigration and gentrification of Fonzie's organizations are prioritizing anti-discrimination work that might usually cast as relevant as not a legal equality campaign that aims to expose a facially neutral policy is administered in a racially targeted manner. The conflation frames its campaign within a larger set of men. This work avoids the danger of legitimizing
powerful systems that other legal reform them, other legal work and present critical political engagements are no resisting pitfalls of rights discourse to seek to build broad-based resistance for resistance formations there, target administration, central law enforcement, mechanisms that are the nodes of distribution of racialized gender requirement funds that their advocacy and material change in the lives of vulnerable populations rather than recognition of formal inclusion. Progress is possible. Obviously, nothing is perfect. There is a distinct change in history that disproves social death theory and individual psychology doesn't create a matrix of oppression, but legal standards can constrain. That's Harris and Lieberman 15. Can you grab me the Higgins card? Yeah. White racism remains widespread deemed a strong exception to bigotry, exaggerating how that racial bias will hold this. 10 minutes now, unquestionably less widespread than once Americans used to have more on them. The move to uniformly in favor of racial equality discrimination is going from norm to an outlaw eradicate. It's difficult to argue that the action of individuals can alone account for the contemporary solution wide array of laws that block discrimination on. The whole sector have been remarkably successful. Although short anti-discrimination laws have clearly worked to reduce racial counsel. Though the significant disparities remain and the influence of direct discrimination has fallen dramatically. Lingering racist sentiments or lingering racist sentiments are no longer powerful enough to account for the full breadth of the divide. All other links assume race neutral doctrine disparate impact to make race the focal point of legal discussion and force it to be be a consideration there. Racial profiling doesn't work in the context of a raft. Removal of prohibition will lead to a marked decrease in incarceration. Even if there is some criminalization afterwards, the effect of the removal would be so large it clearly outweighs the risk of a relapse into criminalization. The focus on discriminatory impact laws change colorblind jurisprudence and has a revelatory effect on white racial consciousness flag. In 99, critical ways to focus on the sounds of rights argument that racial matter and all aspects of the law doctrine. The education color conscious attention is a crucial ingredient right and every result of future careful considerations of racial self-conscious. One step is the deconstruction of transparency and right decision making, nor explicit and explicit and digitally faced racial criteria that carry a disproportionate impact, violate the protections clauses, provides an excellent view for reconsidering race consciousness. One government versus white north and participates in the man's white appearance. We need to reevaluate the discriminatory intent will exercise focusing exclusively on the trial non-transparency is an example of structural racism has transformative potential for the white liberal on the personal level and as a springboard for reflection, even if bias is baked into the law. It proves that they can't solve acting outside of the only way to change that is to adopt behavioral constraints on racial behavior through doctrinal change. That is the span of and their alternative is not mutually exclusive with the oppositional nature of our two political strategies proves combinations better Higgins and 13 diversity viewpoints is not going to proliferation viewpoints and that makes democratically just problems working place. We can't agree because we fundamentally unfruitful about some world view will be worldviews. We should understand that human beings may apprehend truth from radically different sets, but we should be able to articulate how one event different perspectives, taking multiple perspectives and alerts to create formulations or consider responses. We can agree to disagree and skill engage and pragmatic action. Anti-blackness is an inherent or ontological hudson. It's routine in the framework for deciding institutions or in ontological some political modes of other than modes of other nor deciding in advance as ontological fatalism might have the social design of defined into white and black white may be set about by respect for different shows of its sounding is done follow the void of black being functions. This signifies all onto which all forms of society are set to rest whiteness and black and structured by determined practice significations. No matter how I can always be undone the theory that there is racially biased collective self-conscious unconsciousness ridiculous and disproven by 100 years of science figuring out in 5 psychological tests that derives from the non-self-side of the anthropogenic dynamics of theory derived from the 19th century concepts of which libidinal ontology is dispensed entirely is deterministically special multiple non-scientific attempts to underline discoveries claimed by psychoanalysts. Their sentencing trade-off argument is incredibly stupid. This is not linked to the app. It doesn't say the after removal of prohibitions would trade off with any private privileges have bad policy and they have an incentive to do that. In the status quo, reforming drug laws are the best example of a practical step necessary to realize the utopia of abolition. Submarine 8. Drug reform is the key area of discarcerated for the campaign on the combined racial justice and safety organized demonstrating laws created a on the rail laws created pipeline of prison by training the prison black women activists who wrote the policy reliance on the imprisonment the system must be abolished. Prison activism view campaign as building blocks toward the ultimate goal. Practical actions from short and medium term success are essential makers on the road to long-term transformation. Abolitionist vision means we need to build models that represent how we want to live in and the means of practical strategies. That's marked practical strategies. We have to extend politics beyond the realm of immediate experience and the confines of the debate phase era. Politics trades off with structural analysis of systematic fonts from 14 socially imposed identities don't tell us anything about someone's political interest. I'm not here to tell you that personal identity doesn't matter. We are to spend so much time living people privilege, marginalized, oppressed, or oppressed. We neglect to build spaces that antagonize systems that cause our collective problem. Membership of marginalized groups no guarantee that person can understand effectively combat systematic oppression. Yet we seem to treat our marginalized voices as equal instead of learning and recognizing how an overarching system maintains the power and then attacking those tools to defend or actually finding another to embody systematic marginalization.
Good.
Yeah.
Why is the fact that we went and cut academic research, which uses sociological data, different kinds of trends, and that shit is immediate personal experience?
I'm kind of confused.
You had an argument that says we have to extend politics beyond the realm of our immediate experience, and you have made the argument that our alternative is an immediate experiential thing?
Our argument is that politics should start with institutional engagement. Your alternative eschews that.
How is the alternative not engaging in institutions?
Well, you reject the law, you reject the government.
How is that not an engagement in institution?
Well, I guess I'll specify. We make an argument that you should try to use legal tools productively.
Okay. Alright,
as a starting point for engagement. What's that?
What's the next step?
We say that is a good starting point for politics. We've read a litany of evidence that the AF is a fantastic instance of being able to do that. Specifically, the AF says that marijuana prohibitions are illegal because they create a disparate impact on marginalized populations. We think that legal standard has a gigantic effect on the way the law is perceived by a number of people.
In cross-examination, y'all said there would naturally follow the legalization of weed be regulations. How do we not know that those regulations won't be targeted towards black people?
Because the legal standard of disparate impact makes any regulation that would do that illegal.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah.
Wait, how?
Because that's what disparate impact says. It says that if there is a law that has an impact on one race, i.e., enforcing criminalization of drug laws.
This in terms of race?
It can be described in terms of anything, but that's one example that it can be described in terms of any axis of discrimination, I would say. But our evidence speaks. Sorry?
Why is it discrimination?
Well, it might not be discrimination exactly, but our evidence says that when a law is enforced.
Why is it discrimination? Like you use the language of race, you use the language
so
of race.
it's not
because it's discriminatory if laws have a disparate impact on a certain
Isn't
suburb
that the
of the
status
population.
quo?
It is, and we say that's bad. That's why there's
No, doesn't the status quo say that you have to be anti-discriminatory? You have to
The
be
status quo is facially neutral laws that say we can't
Facially
impose
neutral?
laws in a race-biased manner.
Okay.
It would say that any attempt to overrule marijuana prohibitions because they have an impact on one population more than another is bad and against current legal standards. We reverse that.
So wait, the reforms do have to be racially biased to solve the racially biased.
The reforms do not have to be racially biased. It just says that any that is imposed against a population just in a discriminatory manner is illegal.
Okay, so now y'all gonna make the laws right.
What do you mean?
Okay. Basically, what we're saying is,
Yeah, we said the
laws
app should change
bad.
the law.
Y'all gonna make them right.
We say the law should change.
Okay.
Yes, we say it should change. We say current law and the way the law
And we
conceives
should
of
believe that.
race and discrimination is bad. We've read excellent evidence about why you should. Yes.
On the record, I didn't use any prep time.
No prep time?
Yeah, I said I didn't use any.
you starting anywhere particular on case or?
The legalization portion. Where do people focus on? Actually, no. But it will be the top of the one and see where we started.
Your accusations only reflect the ethics of the debate space that allows for the clutch pursing of its own whiteness. The fact that you make this as an ad hominem argument, not one that tries to critically interrogate the way in which certain bodies are positioned in the space in relation to the practices and performances they can take in regards to styles of argumentation is a performative instance of anti-blackness. It means that one, at least they link to criticism, or is a reason why they should independently lose, because that was a completely reactionary response to a reasonable argument. Your next response was mostly that we criminalized you. What? That is fungibility. How could you compare what happened in this debate space to the violence that people have in like things like stop and frisk or being police because their mothers smoke weed in front of them because they're bad mothers to what this happened in this debate space? This shows the fungibility that our Hartman evidence talks about in the ways in which the slave and violence and as a blackness as a suffering position can be taken and interpolated as well. The example she uses is the idea of Franken, who's like, oh, the suffering of the slave on the cop or a slave being whipped is so bad. Imagine your family in that position and doesn't actually understand the agency of that particular object. The affirmative has replicated this abolitionist politics in its response to this particular object. Their counterposition is we shouldn't disclose their arguments and impact turning that Peterson evidence one is he's talking about specifically how in the debate environment the white validity secures and maintains the like there's a discrepant impact in the way in which debate and allowed for the production of new assets besides of teams like Georgetown, Northwestern, and all those PR outcasts. But when other people of color or other non or black identities such as queer and trans people try to engage in these affirmative practices, they are met with things like policing and framework that states this point that you desire that should be the focus of the affirmative on into a caseload and double turn by your attempt to engage in this validity over here, which is independent reason why it's bad. They're only more aggressive arguments are mostly defense by the new acts are productive and they said we change arguments on here, but no, we have still a very consistent theme of argumentation. I've ever said you are anti-black on the affirmative or you are anti-black on the negative. That is mostly predictable way interpretation debate. You are obviously clearly prepared for this debate because you are obviously prepped for this particular issue, which is our particular argument too, because we can't interrogate the anti-blackness of things like online gambling or prostitution. The fact that you read a marijuana act before is like saying, oh, I have a black man. That does not defend you for the way in which you performatively enunciated your whiteness in this particular space. Furthermore, this is also remember they said that this is also the same psychology that justified things like the Holocaust and slavery. Just because everyone is doing it doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing. It means that this is the history of the NDT. We need to have arguments in innovation. Doesn't mean that we should trade that off of ethical advocacy and full intellectual engagements. And also you need new arguments, you need new debates, not new asks. This is another old ask. This is really just a repress thereafter describes the problem that Hartman describes in relation to the position of the slave. Case. Legalization is not an effective starting point for combating the paradigmatic reproduction of anti-black flexibility along the guise of emancipation or protection that only maintains the critical culpability of the slave for the criminal. That's the Hartman 97 and from the one you see that equal the problem of slavery, the problem of abolition is that the extension of the equal protection clause, the extension of protections from the violence of the state, and the emancipation did not fully extend those rights because they make them culpable and responsible subjects. You can see this in the crosses of the what you see is indicative of this when we ask them questions about how is the regulatory mechanism of the affirmative operate on the side of this legal discrepancies, and it says things like yes, children should still go to jail for smoking pot, or children can still be rehabilitated or put into alternative homes away from their families for being pot, or mothers can be removed from their families for having that little brown cigarette for smoking marijuana because their habits are super vague and replicates the fluidity of what is that tailored card that we've been in the 1NC is mishandled by the 1NC, which is mishandled by the 1NC. It's not just legalization, only we've criminalized people. That's the way anti-blackness works, because it's not about racialization, but the way in which things can be pathologized through their inability to actually adhere to a liberal notion of subjectivity. It turns the entirety of the affirmative, because it means that even in a world where they have these discrepancy impacts, you're still in a world where anti-blackness can justify itself under the age things like ageism or any other form of, or actually still having a trap house. Remember, in the process of the 1AC, they also said that the trap house could maybe sort of be legal, but they only have to have one plant. They're putting people that grow in the hood that do not have the same resources to engage in the processes of the affirmative, and there's no explanation how the regulatory mechanism of affirmative resolves that, which means that it rationalizes larger forms of legal forms of violence. It's hamstrung 12. Legal equality struggles that fail to deliver sustained social justice don't be particularly inside the sign of equal legal change, even those who be credible of legal strategies frequently fall back on them, citing legal reform as a necessary evil in the lower cases, spiritual and political imagination argue for the importance of severing that whole these into the legal reform pragmatic. The circumstances is politically possible with endowment, discourse, legal innovations will always reinforce the legal authority of the United States is bound to reset, reiterate, rather than transform unequal distributions of power. It is necessary to engage in a more complex question of what freedom should and could look like, but the legal innovation ability to a broader vision, legal recognition, working constrained, curtail, space, and possibility, freedom by locking people and black people in the idiom defined by obligation and debtness, and responsibility that outlasts freedom to swallow responsibilities and burdens we perpetually have to demonstrate their preparedness and deserving of citizenship and conscience for their blackness, marking as otherwise anti-blackness, racism is fundamentally shaped by the recognition of a liberal subject, the months like labor contract, the extensions of rights to facilitate new obligations and new grants, but with black people might be punished. Google argues that the distinguished features of modern states emerges of power by the money production, regulation, population to make life in particular ways, killing the eternal, external racial black because understood as a necessary element of the population struggle. The black subject was brought into the fold essentially, but it's subject always in need of reform. Punishment, the exclusion of essentially rights can only operate the technique of domination of local construction, local structure, maintenance, pertaining state racism. Historical view determines that the abstract construction of the liberal subject is functions in particular ways of secure and critique anti-black violence, and local subject rationalizes itself against state violence is produced by black people, both women, free and churches, subordinated. Therefore, requires having state racism, extension of citizens of those terms, they're only in one not evidence, even if they will not defend the Gramscian politics of the 1AC, which probably also links back to our validity of whiteness arguments. And it's also a way in which you should conceptualize the act as an agent that has the access to have that local subjectivity to be corrected, to be faced versus the position of the slave that should alienate those things. You can also go to their framework argument. You cannot just view the plan in the motherfucking abstract because you have justifications like those that we have that articulate particular links to. Also, furthermore, the procedural interruptions like our this question of a war positions, the question of audience. This is not a congressional chamber, nor is the hall of court, and even that was the best pedagogical tools in the hall of power and facing slaves to make the judge and audience culpable in their compliance with anti-black values, including the 13, Lewis and 11. Many past scholars and actors consider strategies of tactics rival revolutionaries, the strategy of war position, countering civic political spaces, 20 at a time, on turn of specific pedagogical levels, but this was and the BLA attacks with no aspect of women, hearts, minds, and the canine to order the protest and in-game aggression shows the isolation and emasculation of ruling classes, almost questions. Then I will argue that pedagogical value of retaliating with black person killing one of these, trying to kill black person, by Charles with the benefit of majority of Charles teachers of the complete the case, and more pedagogical value peaceful protest and political character one, so the actions is individually bound to political status of one, so the activities though I air from the side of paradigm as opposed to practice and believe are better political figures so not actions result from what they just their bodies, you still don't know what you are. So it's a sequencing question for how you should understand the alternative, that is why you should also the alternative, because it's not much of what you should do, but how can your body interrelate in those particular organizations or structures, because that demands a different type of orientation towards how we legalize life. The alternative is not just to reject the affirmative, but to refuse to affirm the flexibility and recuperative efforts of civil society to retain its values of freedom and progress, because those only foreclose any sort of actual liberatory emancipation that reclaims agency for the slave. It allows them to do things like isolate Trayvon Martin or Mike Brown as the figurehead of these political movements, but disclose and how as ineffective members, but this is ignore how there are niggas riding in the bank, popping shots, and actually riding to force these structural changes that they're talking about. Furthermore, all their evidence is in the context of racism, not anti-motherfucking blackness. There's a distinction here that I made in the concept of what you see, and the distinction that was also made too. See, it's racism, anti-blackness is not of racism. Racism is an experiential fact that happens when you do something in the performance of the one you see, or the performance of the see that you either clutch your purse or like, oh, there are black people. Anti-blackness is the foundational logic in which we can use pathology and discrepancies of like, hey, that's dirty, that's black, hey, that's poor, that's black, hey, that's unproductive, that's black. That association reifies pathology. You can extend that across the global context. I know whether slaves in Brazil, slaves in Cambodia, or the way in which other ways vice versa. Because it also disactive permutation, because the permutation doesn't make sense in a world where we have two incompatible theories. That one will be in the one and are the only and one not debate, but this is the reason why you don't get access to a permutation in a world where one, you have enacted your fluidity, and two, your defense of the law still replicates still only reifies the prohibition, the strategy, still actually allows for the incarceration of people, means that your act doesn't solve and only intensifies anti-black violence. That's why section says that in order to understand that there's no racial pretext for the policing of black people, that we need to understand the way in which anti-blackness makes them a prior fact. That's why we can extend those things to like other global situations like the international war on drugs, because you don't have to be black to be suffering from anti-blackness. Black people have an unprivileged but understood relationship to blackness, which is why our pedagogical reorientation is good for you three white men in the room, which is not your comfortable position. To switch sides in this case is not good. I refuse the affirmative.
So before the round, when you asked for disclosure, why didn't you tell us about any of these stasis arguments? Before the round, when you asked for disclosure, you didn't tell us about any of these stasis.
If you just told me what your app was,
you didn't give us a reason.
You
didn't give us a reason to disclose to you. Like, why should we have? You didn't give us a reason to disclose to you.
Yeah, we're gonna debate you. That's why we should disclose.
So, I guess, how can you prove that anything we have done is motivated by fluidity when you gave us no reason or presented none of these arguments for why that's bad?
We have made multiple arguments as to why you should not have read a new app,
Okay.
or you should at
But
least disclose
that's not
the new
really
app.
answering
You
the
could have read the
question.
new app all you want. You could
So I guess when is it okay to like have a new debate about a new area? Is it only when you've had the chance?
We say new debate is good. Your app is not
Is
new debate.
is there?
That's all the link arguments in the
So
app.
that's great. So if the app isn't new, why weren't you prepared to debate it?
It's not just a question of preparation. We
Okay.
said in this particular instance where we could have debated things like online gambling, that essentially
We haven't read our normal online gambling app this tournament. What made you
That's
think we
cool.
would read that?
because that was the app I prepped for. That's the app I prepped for.
Which
Toxic
app did you
Games.
prep for?
The one that talked about
The foreign operators app?
Yeah.
Really?
They talked about black people. Black people like to fucking gamble too.
We didn't
That's not the
read
slide
a
point.
nice
Telling
gambling
us
app.
that
Anyway,
that app is not that ass?
let's talk about the
That
case
app
for a
was
second.
like base, yeah.
How did the judges accept culpability?
We said the judges should accept culpability by one putting themselves out of the picture. This argument will listed evidence that Yeho and Reed, since we're talking about disclosure, this argument will listed evidence that Yeho and Reed in the 1R makes that claim that in order for us to actually have positions for folks that have been blackened or in the context of enslaved humanity, we should put the strategies of the settler out of the position because it ignores the fundamental capability agency that they already have, i.e. the movements I'm describing in this flow that allow for the position of the black people in the back to actually wow and intensify and antagonize the shit out of civil society.
Why does that
and force a change.
why does that necessarily exclude an affirmation of our political
Oh yeah, because we said that's a bulletin piece of evidence I want to see that says that the way in which we should orient ourselves towards the subjects of social death is through negation, not affirmation. Affirmation of freedom, affirmation of progress, affirmation of the law, all serve to disenfranchise and intensify violence towards black and
this argument is just like negation is good, affirmation doesn't do anything.
That's why we made it also the positioning argument, prerequisite arguments about how we should understand bodily positioning.
If negation, so does negation not do anything or does it do something?
No, negation is an argument that says that we can find a politically enabling position in the slave, the dispossessed, the unasked grammar
How do you create a politics around just negation and refusal? How do you create like political movements based on just negation and refusal?
Pretty much Black Panther Party was a good example.
So the Black Panthers you think was just negation?
Well,
really?
No, actually,
no, I don't think so.
I was trying to get the story, but I just want to know. I like what you.
All right.
Everyone good? You can float under the 2 NR. I'll tell you where we are.
There's 2 and C.
2 and C. Just reading on. Everyone ready?
Yeah, hold on 1 second. Yeah, we're ready.
Negation is a politically enabling site whereby we can mobilize politics against the anti-black world and prioritizing questions of social death does not foreclose social life or radical work. You see the civil death that embraces destruction of civil society, activates the suicidal agency of the slaves. It's Hartman and Wilson and 3. The existence of space of death where negation is capitalist into possibility fraction, whether that the thing of that of radical views of social order acts that are called suicidal self-destruction, that is a paradox of agency for those in extreme circumstances. I'm not saying that the space is complete negation, that there is no life, but the life is not analogous to those touchstones that can use this whole civil society together. The trajectory of life with the civil society death is bound up in claiming the violence that splits at the heart of the world that puts the settler out of the picture now. Onto the reformism debate. First, reformism is going to fail. You can extend the 1 and C Hartman evidence that they fundamentally mishandled because the Hartman evidence talks about the ways in which emancipation was a fucking ruse and how the emancipation, when you put it when you put behind the individual and the self-possessed that can create themselves, enable that, look at that, able that it's encumbered. The strategies are based on only mystify the way the violence is perpetrated beyond the disciplining and normative norms. And now and that legal reform procedures and singular American subject unifies that subject. It can never the fact that black is object and the two Americans deny the subjectivity. And remember that the prison is not just the wall. The prison is not just the walls. And on the second argument that the way that they will ultimately lead in still more anti-black way modes of captivity. It's brought this culture evidence that the prison system is incentivized to keep people there regardless of the actual crimes committed. Even if they do this, they have not specified that the legalization of marijuana will actually resolve this. And the plan does not legalize the hustle weed regulations of black people, prevent them smoking how they want to or selling how they want to. Dealers still will get locked up for the intent to disregard. Black people want to get the government won't like we are because they don't like the government, and so they will still be locked up for smoking weed without a card. And this is Yeah, and this is also an extension of our high.
This
is a terminal impact to their app that turns their app because their app can't actually solve for this. This is also the 1NC Hartney and Glassman evidence that they have also not answered, and you can also extend our Rodriguez evidence that answers back their Sudbury evidence and their Spade evidence and their Flag evidence that talk about how reform is possible because Rodriguez argues that the reason why we have the prison industrial complex. And the reason why we have it's the reason why we've gotten here to the point of the prison industrial complex is because of the American liberal impulse towards reform. Because the prison developed, even if you solve for one specific form of prohibition, that is one form of policing, that you will still leave the prison industrial complex in place. That will still not specified at the plans. And they have also not answered our Bracey piece of evidence, and they think that all right, we can change progress, but no, our Bracey evidence has a brilliant warning about white convergence theory and how this shit can be reversed in the instance where white people think that it is no longer in their interest to keep these laws in place. Remember that when they do this is only an assertion that our Bracey evidence that there is no actual proof that liberal progressives will actually have these sort of social justice initiatives.
This is the best piece of evidence in this particular debate because it's highly responsive to all the other make these arguments.
Yeah, this is the best evidence in this debate because this is highly responsible to every piece of evidence that they're reading and that they are not responding to. And here's an extent, and that they only re-entrench it by reading this they only re-entrench the sort of say that we are re-entrenching our own victimization. Bracey in 14. Omium on insist that the state is always in the state of unequal equilibrium and subject to sufficiently organized racial project. The pluralist version of RC adherents to conclude that anti-racist movement has simply failed to offer sufficiently compelling arguments for the interest. They conclude that resistance will fail in large part because the activist shortcomings. The pluralist version of RC blames victim for the continued pressure. The CRT of the state repudiates any analysis that blames people of color for white suppression. The narrative tradition within CRT and its method of utilizing outsider state was the loci for interpreting legal questions take for granted the outsider status that is defined by the constant suffering of continuing resistance. CRT highlights how the state backs and often expands white group power from this.
Go to Hudson.
Actually, that power.
Yeah.
Okay. And as for Hudson is referencing a super old Wilson article that has 4 paragraphs long and is definitely not an actual representation of Wilson argument. It'd probably be a red flag that Hudson is willfully misinterpreting what Wilson is saying. Second, Hudson is trying to draw a distinction between the ontic relation and the ontological relation, then trying Wilson to find an ontological argument. However, Wilson is explicit in his book that he is not talking about capital O ontology, but rather political ontology. If you read the Hudson article and read the description of this ontic relation, is literally the same argument that Wilson is making. Wilson does not say that black people are ontologically dead, derelict, etc., as if it was a prior state of being, but rather that drawing from phenomena have no ontological resistance in the face of civil society due to the series of contingent circumstances, that is, Enlightenment thinking, slavery, colonialism, that have allowed anti-blacks to form the basis of modernity. 3, if you actually read the whole Hudson article, and it agrees with Wilson that Hudson, it says that colonial anti-black attitudes are sedimented, but the collective social psyche in the total revolution and the end of the world will be capable of reversing these things. And this is another reason why it's another extension of our Bracey evidence is to advance back to their Hudson evidence, and their Hudson evidence is going to flow out. Y'all motherfuckers keep reading this evidence like it's gonna negate this when it ultimately agrees against us. And there's such okay. Where was I? Okay.
Go back to the Bracey evidence he was reading.
Back to the Bracey evidence I was reading. Yeah, CRT perceives a clear power imbalance between whites and non-whites. It impacts interpersonal relationships and the relationships between 1, as marginalized people of color have less power than whites. 2, that people of power imbalance ensures that whites alone have the power to erase. And 3, the power imbalance includes white power to exclude people of color from normative politics. 4, people of color persistently resist but cannot unilaterally not their attitudes about non-whites argument determines whether whites' interests in subsequent political actions continue. Racial oppression is never attributable to people of color's organizational and strategic failures and solely indicative of the power-dependent racism. Simply put, the CRT of the 6th assertion that whites have a greater relative power and thus play a dominant role in determining race policy necessarily presumes an instrumentalist policy that respected that same theory. And all of this is the reason why they should have disclosed their act in the first place.
Okay. Press conference.
Find the aggregated links to the film.
Usually it's posted on the college policy page. Okay, can usually makes a post before every round.
Yeah, usually there's a post before every round. If they want to, they can also look up.
33.
What's that? 2015.
You said to what? 5:30.
Oh.
5:30. So we have 5.
What do y'all have as alcohol?
I don't think it's we need that.
You'll have 457.
Okay.
You have
33.
you have 5:30.
5:30.
Yeah. If you want those 3 seconds, you can take them back by force.
Wait, you just confused. Ours is not 5:30. It's 4:15.
It's 5.
Oh.
I think it's 4:57. That's what I have.
You taking
I'll
ours?
keep the 3 seconds.
Yeah.
Let's all have 3 seconds.
I guess I gave you the 3 seconds to them. But that's
There you
not
go.
how I did it originally. If you feel like it's yours, you
I
can
can
just take
stand.
it back.
No.
I'm not gonna fight you over those 3 seconds.
He says he won't touch you.
I have no interest in fighting you, Ricky.
I'm not interested in fighting anything.
Alright, it's gonna be T, or the, what are we calling this? Framework T?
It's disclosure theory, yeah?
Disclosure theory. Disclosure theory, then the case. Everyone good? Okay.
We meet this argument because we disclosed that marijuana affirmed their distinction is arbitrary because the cards and advantage was obvious would always change, which means proves it's impossible for them to prove which arguments would change, which proves that the link to this argument is inevitable regardless of what we would actually disclose, because argument practices would change. The impact is inevitable because everyone changes argument, even if they, for example, even if they argue anti-blackness consistently, the particular arguments within that change would prove their distinction is arbitrary. Counter-termination, we do not have to disclose where our offensive arguments versus new apps are good. They allow for argument refinement of vetting of research that we done for the NDT to increase critical thinking because it forces people off of the pre-run preparation, which increases your ability to think on your toes. People's ability to think on your toes. Skill debates are bad because they deny the possibility of individual change, which links to all of our arguments about hidden motive thesis, which means we have a defense of them having to make a new affirmative. Second, this is the war on drugs moving. They are allowed to move the goalpost of what is an acceptable argument, acceptable new argument, which is less for arbitrary policing, which links to all of our arguments. Is not that it's the same thing as not the same thing as slavery or the war on drugs, but the logic itself is replicated. It's not a fungibility argument. There, our second argument is hidden motives. This argument relies on relies on your ability to prove that we did this for a racist reason, which obviously turns you into top police, which is a terrible stance for Georgetown LM, makes you into the worst judge ever, which also is this is McCarthyism. Hamilton 96 how support of accusations for what was successful coercive subtraction McCarthyism the ability of secretive communist activity leaves some sources with the really data unsupported accusations. It says this is strategy unsupported accusations replicating radical capability and natural strength for the fundamentals to explode hidden motives of bigotry, hidden conspiracy, supporting oppression, accusation based on feelings alone is justified. Our defense first is that this is just disingenuous because they didn't offer any of these justifications for disclosure before the round. This is ultimately just strategic argument that you should not exclude the affirmative. Second is that obviously defending the after the entire debate provides a stable locus of author Charles all of their offense of the role of the ballots as soon as this argument determines how your ballot should operate in the first place. They don't have the resolution basis for this, so as long as we win that, we win. Now the case debate. At the top, the role of the ballot is to simulate the enactment of the plan. They have to contest the desirability of that imagined world. Is the only non-arbitrary standard for debate. The 1AC is the locus of offense because in allowing the negative to shift the goalpost puts us permanently behind a reasonably level playing field. Is a prior question to any of their substantive offense because their ability to engage with in the first place. The AF is a method of making people culpable because actions have disparate impacts. Which in the disease of the 1AC, the 1AC is a defense of our method and proves that the alternative is the opposite of culpable because they don't take action. Van Ridgwick is an answer to this and says that legal change is a way of recognizing historical culpability, which is proves the necessity of pure negation, which means the permutation will obviously solve this argument. Second is that ethical absolutism for its own sake is bad because we can never take action to solve material instances, which means if you think culpability is important, then you should obviously admit the result. Don't make the enemy don't make the perfect enemy to good. Williams did not struggle does not mean we realize our struggle for rights and race and we have no intention to advocate for legal justice in the court. So even though we have a chance of success, maybe claim this language advantage despite its absence of justice, we must do everything possible to relate the right of races. Black people should press for land try to equal by application of laws Americans or the court saying the judges which side is Hartman's empathetic identification, which they have said is bad, which links to all of their arguments. Our case debate, you have not answered any two framing arguments. The first is that the war on drugs is bad, kills millions of people every year. It kills millions of people every year, leads to policing and communities of color destroys that it causes. It is the material manifestation of anti-blackness. Material manifestation of anti-blackness also causes environmental destruction, also militarized intervention in places like Colombia, for example, all of which are not impacted. They have conceded that the AF would destroy the entirety of the prohibition regime, which obviously would solve this argument. They've also conceded that there are specific standard for legal jurisprudence to be the filter for how you evaluate all of this argument. The legalization link arguments. The AF is a starting point. The AF is a starting point that removes the prohibition. They have no no reason why it is good for people to be able to lock up in this task while all of their link arguments assume the application of facially neutral equal protection jurisprudence, which is our argument. That is bad. Or that argument is bad. The disparate impact standard would be able to reverse that because by proving that there is jurisprudence should have to take effect of racially disparate impacts, for example, which means all of your link arguments do not apply if they do not say the disparate impact standard is bad. All of the next argument is that marijuana law's example is a particular instance of anti-black jurisprudence, which means resulting in is at least a step in the right direction, which even if it's not perfect, you should not make the enemy of that. You should not make the because that was our Williams evidence. We can use disparate impact as a way to interrogate liberal neutrality and the particular consumption of particular the liberal the liberal production of particular subjects, which means which means most of this is not offered. And we are not Graham. We are certainly not Gramsci, and neither is our own CRB. There's not a march towards racial equality, but there is a quantifiable difference in how people were treated now versus the past. For example, slavery, the material manifestation of slavery have changed. There are still disparate impacts, which is the point of our affirmative, but health, education, wealth gaps are all closing, which is proof the notion that this is somehow outside of space and time. The role of the bad argument was they already answered above. The ontological nature of ontology debate, anti-blackness, not ontological signifiers are contingent reflections, which is something that they've said. If it is a political ontology that proves that it can't be reversed, which is proven by changes to the status quo in the very particular gaps, our Hudson evidence is nowhere set in stone. It's nowhere set in stone, so which proves that we can make material changes to alter the material impact of anti-blackness. There's no the libidinal component of empathetic identification is not external to this because even if there's a psychological component that is obviously reflective of material distribution and power, which means if we can resolve those or alter them in some manifestation, in some way, then we're able to at least change the impact of the argument, permutation, do the plan, and the alternative or Higgins evidence impact towards their contradictions argument is good because it produces new forms of knowledge. You should evaluate the permutation like we're reading two books against each other, produces new liberatory practices, which obviously the case is net benefit because the alternative does not result in the change of drug laws and the permitted. Their performance is that is question begging of whether they when they link to that argument in the first place. The alternative does not do it. The negation does not do anything. It does not change drug law. We have net benefit voting picks if it becomes more than 2 hours of voting because it makes it impossible for us to be negative because it is literally debating against the possibility of world peace. There's also no literature. Reformism is our only reform is our only option. It's not a 13 agency exerted through breaking the power bomb or sense of the notion of the direct opposition of becoming often recognition may reverse the HM's claim in the cards used by the pure beings of the absolute strength needs a desire to double for pure identity may not have the possibility subject of a fundamental autonomy free of the agency. The detriment of the universals are treated with the imperial flow states. The agency is redescription and total rejection. The opposition to totalizing script stop. And this is not script. The Sudbury evidence is a crush for this prison turner. It says we literally starve the prison industrial complex of our ability to its ability to lock people because there would no longer be laws to do so. Also, disparate impact solves this argument because if private prisons have a disparate impact on particular minorities, then we solve that argument. This also disproves that even if interest convergence is the squo, we solve the reason why interest convergence is messed up.
The Higgins evidence from the 2AC.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, that was sort of just like an analogy for how you should evaluate the term.
Is it 2AC or 1AC?
2AC.
2AC. Did you send that?
Yep. Oh, actually, no.
I'm not going to go for this argument as a procedural argument as to reject the team, so I'll chill about it. But I will go for this as a double turn to your framework arguments that demand for stasis on the affirmative and the inability to not change your position. You are the ones that have changed the goalposts, and our argument is in particular that when this happens to black and other positionalities, that we are met with the same policing tactics that are justified the processes of your affirmative, which means that this is at least a dissad to the permutation and the way in which they have performed their re-solidification of both whiteness, which is not racism, and anti-black fungibility. Their image of fairness is only justified via these tradition arguments. The biggest response to that is that our counter-tradition is, you could have pre-closed. You already do open source. These are all non-unique reasons as to why their counter-tradition doesn't matter. Any of their offense doesn't matter because you have already participated. If it's true that this is just another marijuana act, then why did you break a new one? Why did you just could have given us the speech document the way I could have just given you all my expandos? You never actually changed that process because you only talked to Eric about our disclosure. And then when me and Yeho and Jackie came in here to ask you about what your app was, you were like, nah, new app. That shows the discrepancy that happens for black debaters in relation to how performative instances of whiteness in which is why you should extend the Peterson evidence. You know what I mean? It's like you don't even have any effort to at least apologize for this shit, bro, which is another independent reason as to why your interpretations are mostly self-serving. Furthermore, all of your offense is basically still the same type of fungibility that said just because you said it's not as bad as racial profiling doesn't mean that you didn't make that juxtaposition in the 2AC. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't be held accountable for those things because that replicates the fungibility of blackness that says that I can cover myself in your suffering to this particular conversation, which is bullshit when you've conceded the Wilderson positioning war position argument on the framework that says that you need to understand this is a different kind of audience and a different kind of relationship that we have, and to put yourself out of the picture in such a way to not allocate yourself in that whiteness is not better. NDT tradition just only reifies the banality arguments that we have been making, which means that at worst, at best, this is just another reason why they don't get access to the permutation. Okay. The only thing the affirmative really says is if disparate impact solves, but this does not actually answer on the level of face-neutral policy embracing, which doesn't answer the core of our pessimism argument. Because in the first piece of leak evidence, which is 1014 evidence, says that legalization switches the goalpost to target underage children and only re-synchronized racially profiling idea, which only racially profile. Their demands for specificity of this question only is the mystification process of civil society that says that we can add that particular attachment to a freedom of pedagogy of pessimism is better because it says that we should not trust those in particular. And similarly, Justice, you have also conceded that this is a terminal impact of the 1NC piece of gratuitous violence argument that Yeho makes sense that it's not just the historical history trajectory, but the reinsubstantiation of anti-black violence, because you've also conceded the section piece of evidence that says it's not racial profiling. Anti-blackness is not racism. The section evidence says that anti-blackness produces a problem people, a pathologized people that we can still re-articulate and message internal intention subject evidence, because even if those children are caught smoking weed, they can be sent to alternative homes, and families can be broken up by child protective services, because all in the name of health and public safety, they are not proper liberal subjects of transitions to our Canada Swami pieces of evidence and our Harmony pieces of evidence that says that that's the way in which rights function and demands you to be a responsible agent in relation to how you can be an individuated subject. It comes with a contract that you will do the good and right things. It does not account for the way in which certain bodies in position have different sort of ways of life, which is our Hartman and Wilson pieces of evidence that have different forms of particular kinship, which also means that you reify and intensify the violence of the law by hiding its flexibility in the contractual process that maintain and complex litigation. You do not compare a piece of evidence or this particular guard. Your only real offense here is the permutation, but also the counsel makes the argument that the over-focus of the law only forecloses our political imagination to engage in the dance of social death of the slave, because it only reifies that pragmatic approach that articulates from the proper things of consumption. Furthermore, you now go to the one in argument, you extend the Bracey evidence to the head of their secondary evidence, and all of their only one evidence you have to hold them to, and that's the fluidity of white is the one in argument the plan will solve, because he added the word this. He basically talks about how white convergence theories means that all reforms can be taken away because whites don't hold the power. The example one gives is the Voting Rights Act of voting rights decision that was made in the 2013 Supreme Court, which rolled back the progressive gains of that particular institution. Our evidence is actually way more comparative than this and has a victimization impact that it was conceded, which is the second piece of racial evidence that said that you will go tell people in the back of the line in Ferguson, Missouri, that are popping shots at the police to go back home and relearn the law. That is what is disabling, that does not see the slave as completely enabling slave, because that is the politics of the slave, a refusal to affirm and to stand to destruction in the world, that this pedagogical orientation is space where your ballot does not actually allow people out of jail. Your ballot does not allow for any actual strategies to actually combat racism. The way that we should do this is not in terms of praxis, but paradigm, not structure, but paradigm. The way in which these things are represented in education. The Georgia State makes the threshold for like entirely too high. This is bad for education. The reason why you can't just say that it's 2 books and we can read the books together because these books say different things about each other that make it mutually exclusive. Remember, Hudson is drawing a distinction between the ontological and ontological, not the political ontology of blackness that affects the things like how we view things like black people protest as bias, how we view things as certain social relations as pathological, and how we understand that those resistances have no value in the eyes of the law. That's why the Hartman evidence is still important here, because the way in which we can learn from emancipation is that not to give more rights, but to literally abolish the way in which the law maintains certain forms of scenes of subjection. You maintain that empathetic identification with all your performances of fungibility and all your attachments to an anti-black civil society, which blinds you from the ability to understand the distinction between racism and anti-motherfucking blackness. You have lost this debate.
5:30.
Yeah, I know.
Let's talk about that in like 2 minutes. disclosure theory and then case. Three framing arguments. One, it is impossible to clearly define what constitutes a new argument. Cards, advantages, highlighting arguments, all change which is impossible, an impossible standard for anyone to meet, including them. Second, they didn't make any of these arguments in pre-round disclosures. Reasons why we should disclose the way they asked. That proves this is disingenuous and strategically motivated and is the link to our thought policing this. And third is that they've dropped out the role of the ballot as a prior question because there is no resolutional basis for this theory argument. Counterinterpretation, we did not have to disclose. That counterinterpretation does not mean that we never disclosed in any instance, but that it's just not mandated. First is our offense, not fully disclosing goods is good. Forcing teams to pure pre-round coaching and prep is good. It makes people think about their makes people think about their foes, which increases the critical thinking, which is the only portable skill we get from debate, which is not answered in the 2-and-R. It turns you into the thought police because it makes you assess our motives for arguments, which is both impossible to verify and the logic of McCarthyism because it assumes that there is a racial conspiracy that has empirically caused violence and it's a bad mode of politics that should be rejected. We didn't make a stasis argument, only that we should get to weigh the 1AC, and this isn't a double turn because we didn't move the goalposts. They have conceded that defending the 1AC throughout the round solves their predictability offense. We're sorry if we should have disclosed differently. The case. The affirmative is a very simple premise that the removal of prohibitions on marijuana and a shift away from racially neutral drug jurisprudence and legal jurisprudence is good. In order for them to win this debate, they are relying on saying that all legal change at any point in time, anywhere, always is anti-black. If we win that our legal change in the instance of marijuana is a good thing, then you vote F because it fundamentally disproves that agency is impossible under the law, and it also proves that progress is possible, which means you have to err away from absolute negation. One very easy way to vote on this is that they have conceded or impact about the war on drugs. The legalization of marijuana in the U.S. has a bandwagon effect away from global drug prohibition. None of their links implicated because it's not tied to legal right to reformism. It's simply a question of governmental perception. While it says that the trend is moving away right now in the U.S., can bring other countries on board because they want to stop, and we are the only ones forcing them to keep doing it. The impact is really damn large. Environmental destruction and death on the scale of millions per year and reinforced cycles of structural violence and poverty and marginalization at the hands of exploitative law enforcement. They've conceded that the action of the AF would solve it. We have proven that you can affirm a politics that alleviates violence independent of the debate about legal reform. This means the AF is desirable. In practical terms, it outweighs the effect of potentially residual policing. It also means that paradigm can be tied to politics. You can vote for the politics and the epistemology of the AF as a reason why this would work in the political sphere. Obviously, negation, and obviously the arguments about negation is tied to the political sphere too. I'll talk about that a little bit down below. Now, the permutation plan and the alternative, the net benefit is the case. It solves the residual link and external impact about the structure of anti-blackness. Reading contradictory methods are good. It produces new forms of knowledge that aids in struggle. Obviously, there is some residual link, but our Higgins evidence indicate that, and then it indicates that or moves away from polarization. Otherwise, we just negate it, and we say that politics is completely impossible, which is interesting because they don't have a damn defensive negation in the 2-and-R. Zanatti evidence says that completely insulating ourselves from political institutions leads to an effect where people move away from any sort of politics that could lead to a change in the structures of violence, and we have made arguments why those structures are the things that reinforce the material constraint of anti-blackness, which means there is some good thing about the perm and being able to affirm both forms of paradigms as contradictory. Their perm's bad arguments are new in the 2-and-R and should be stricken from the flow. The perms are good and they're a test of the link to the affirmative, which is obviously important for negative strategy. His second argument is that reading different books are bad. That's the whole point. Contradiction is good. The law debate. The AF is a radical change in the way the law is conceived. All rights law, etc., up till now has been seen in a racially neutral light, which means that anything to benefit a particular race is thrown out as discriminatory. The AF is a new jurisprudence that rejects that frame and says that racially disparate effects of law are the centerpiece of any new legal discussion. That form of race-conscious jurisprudence creates a past-present connection that recognizes the violent origins of many laws and polities and forces recognition and accountability, which solves the thesis-level critique of the law that it can never pin down and be used and then used against racist ideologies. That is a Van Ryswick evidence. That is especially important in answering their culpability and war position arguments because you have dropped that this type of legal analysis is a way for you to accept your culpability in violence via the material impact of legal structures and see the way that current jurisprudence is bad. Both teams agree this is the case. The only difference is whether that acknowledgement of culpability should be tied to negation or affirmation. The whole speech proves it should be the latter, recognizing the material effect of the law on race and making them the focus of legal debates inculcates a new history and imaginative frame of the law that clearly doesn't solve every instance of legal violence. However, it does change the unconscious coordinates of the way people perceive race
in the eyes of the law, which enables fundamentally different productive solutions to emerge. Their critiques of the law are all in the context of the civil rights movement and laws about racial equality. That is not the app. For Spade evidence makes the distinction very clear. There are intersectional movements that are seeking to reform discriminatory laws just for the sake of them having a discriminatory effect. We do not affirm some sort of telos or equality or convergence theory, which is a link to their Omi and Watt bad argument, but rather we say that there should be small practical changes that center around the advocacy by minority groups, specifically avoids the harm of wider sweeping efforts that attempt to essentialize the needs of everyone else, which is the point of disparate impact. The two-way evidence about abolition indicates that marijuana specifically is a very good site for being able to reform the prison, that it would actually starve the prison industrial complex. There are regulations, bad arguments. We obviously can't affirm a utopian world where everyone can smoke weed. That is not something that could happen at the political level. The only claim we have made is that the removal of prohibitions and regulation of marijuana is better than the status quo, and they have not refuted that contention. But something to consider is that the alternative does not remove prohibitions. The status quo under the alternative is obviously way goddamn worse than it would be under a politics of the affirmative. There is no, this is not a terminal impact argument. Gratuitous violence exists now under the regime of prohibition. We understand that racism is not the same as anti-blackness, but prohibition clearly uses anti-black violence in its enforcement, which we think is bad. Their final argument is that obviously the app doesn't lead to political change. We agree with that. Our whole argument is about why when we are forming epistemologies for political movements and for acting, we should think about institutional change, which we have eschewed. Our whole argument is that negation can only lead you into self-negation. It ignores all of the material effects that institutions have on power, which causes their impacts.
Always a pleasure.
Good job.
Dude, I told you I don't do. Dude, come on. Also, you can't. Let's remember the prelim.
Georgetown.
What?
Hey, no. So, for me, it's a difficult decision, which is why it took me nearly an hour. I think it's made difficult by sort of a meta debate question, or sort of some meta debate issues, which is I really thought that one thing that made it really hard is, well, first of all, I thought that the 2NR dramatically pushed back into the debate. I thought that your block was kind of a mess, the issues why, but I thought the 2NR really brought it back. I thought 2AR also, like, the failure to extend specific pieces of evidence in some sort of coherent way meant that, like, they have like a ton of evidence floating around, and you have like vague arguments, which makes it really difficult to to make a decision for you in a lot of ways. And if they had sort of pushed in the same way earlier in the debate necessarily, I think that you would have been in even deeper trouble than you were. Ultimately, this is kind of how I think my decision goes down. I don't vote on your permutation. I think that your arguments on this, I think this Higgins argument doesn't make any sense. Why should you get credit if you're wrong? You have to win your AF. You have to win that they're wrong to win this argumentation. So it's like, look, we're never going to agree on these things, so we should just we should just like agree to disagree and understand this as multiple perspectives. If they're right about their arguments, then you're wrong. I wouldn't vote for you, which means that the permutation is pretty bad. I really thought this was a position where you could have teed off a lot more and been like, this is like postmodern liberalism. There's no truth. It's just a bunch of cultural perspectives, kind of junk, right? Which I think in some ways is sort of the story of the debate. In some ways for you, I think there were a lot of missed opportunities for you to apply your evidence a lot more specifically. I think that you have good evidence, and that I am sort of impressed by the quality of the evidence that you're reading in the debate. So ultimately, it's not a permutation issue. Case arguments. I think the case has a realistic chance of making inroads in the war on drugs. Part of the problem is you just don't really make any direct confrontation with these arguments. You have like some rollback arguments, like it could happen, but it's just like you just like don't go to these pieces of paper or describe why they're false, or really even indicate why you wouldn't prioritize those arguments in the debate, which make it really difficult for me to completely ignore those arguments. I think 2AR could have impacted that a lot more. You're like, look, they haven't breathed a word on this stuff, and we think we solve it. But how do I compare that to the terminal impact arguments they're going for? Again, makes it really difficult to sort out the debate. Could have really helped. 2NR could have maybe even have won the debate if you had made those arguments more and they would have answered them. But if you had been like, look, I get they're going to extend this war on drug stuff, it's irrelevant, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you had framed that argument and featured it much more significantly, I think that, and the same thing had happened, and they would have done it the way they did. I think that you may have won the debate. In any sense, their claim that they make bigger inroads in the war on drugs, and that's like a really bad thing. You don't have any answer to that, and that your alternative would also probably not fix it is a pretty big deal. Is a pretty big deal in the sense that like you just don't have a political resolution of that problem. Also, so a second issue is the political aspect of the AF. I was sort of disappointed by by Georgetown cards here. I think that, and they're not extended very well. A lot of these Reject evidence is okay, but this new jurisprudence argument that you're making is really well spun out, but the evidence is just kind of mediocre about it. It's like we need a new rights paradigm. I really think that if this is I really think OU, if you had been much more on top of the evidence arguments that they're making and not let them sort of spin so much of this evidence in your favor, it would have been on its favor. So the whole time they're making these arguments about how they changed jurisprudence and things like that. I think you should, if you had been like, look, this Van Rysser card is really about a rights equality framework. It says it like in the first.
Why is that not responding to like all of them?
No. You have to be right on it. You can't just be like, we're just saying stuff about their stuff because you're letting it go through. So I think that's disappointing. The word jurisprudence, you still don't like say that word hardly, maybe not at all, and that you need to directly confront their spin on this. I really doubt that their evidence that they reimagined the law in a new way is probably true. It really doesn't make any sense concerning the couching of it, but there's just a lack of pushback on this argument, and that's really frustrating. Because they don't extend any evidence very well on it, except for this piece of Reject evidence. They just sort of talk in generalities, critique arguments. So they have a possibility of the case. I'm not impressed by their arguments, but they're winning a lot of spin on this argument. Critique arguments, which I'm going to treat separately, even though they're all on the same piece of paper.
Why do you don't care about it?
What's that?
Don't worry about it.
Because that's the way I systematically make decisions.
I don't care. It's okay.
So critique argument. This debate sort of gets, like I said, gets way closer to the rebuttal for those reasons. I think the problem is about spin and application. I'm not really sure what the politics of the alternative do to resolve any of its link arguments. Not really well clear explained to me in a way that I grasp. I really think in one of the pieces of evidence that you read, the one I asked for the mark on, there's a really nice piece about needing a new vocabulary after that. You just kind of.
Which card?
So it was the one I told you about the mark. It was a piece of.
It was the Luderson.
Yeah, I mean, there's new vocabulary stuff that you don't read. It would have been a nice spin. I don't really get how you
make those arguments and read those cards in other places, but it's okay. Keep going.
Yeah, there's not like a point where you're like, if you vote negative, you resolve some sort of any of these issues, and that's like you've got to sit down and do that. I'm just not going to do that for you. And so there's a problem of uniqueness there's a problem of uniqueness control on this issue. If I vote negative, they're framing it as like a really awful world. And you just sort of like, there's just like no pushback on how you would either create a new politics which makes their complaints irrelevant, or you would resolve some of your link arguments, or something like that. Because I think that, I think that, the potential for you to frame their AF as not at all is, but really the same old thing is really there. When I read some of your evidence, by the way, I think that you could leverage it much better. I think you should leverage this paradigms argument you're making much better about what, if you're winning like this, they read this, you were talking about how paradigms of debate, paradigms of how we understand blackness versus like their Hudson argument. If this argument is leveraged better, well, first of all, you win the arguments against their Hudson card,
Yes,
and then don't like run wild with what that win means. Does that make sense? I think you should have. It's sort of like you got what you wanted. Defeat this Hudson card. Do the exact right technical debate thing, which is like we make a bunch of indicts that don't answer, which is totally true. And then you don't exploit what you've won and explain why if you win this premise issue about how we look at the nature of politics itself, what does it mean for the rest of the debate? I kind of thought that should have been the framing issue for the debate itself at the top, and like you lost your defense of the premise of your argument, which is that you could do something about blackness in this way, which means that like really I don't get what your AF does. Now I'll answer their offense, which is their case arguments. I think you would have been in a much better shape. But ultimately, the other sort of commentary I have, I think you would have been even closer in this debate, although you are close. If you had taken a lot of your evidence, which I read is good, and applied it to the circumstances and had actual political scenarios. All your cards are like really abstract and need some sort of.
So what did you think of our pathology, ageism sort of argument, the imprisoning of black mothers because of public health safety, the biopolitics arguments, which are all.
Yeah, well, I think those biopolitics arguments need to be articulated much better about their liberal subjectivity kind of arguments. I think you just sort of assert liberal subjectivity. I think you need to be a lot more about why does the AF do that?
Yeah,
because they're saying they don't do that, and they have a bunch of spin about why they don't. The second thing is the second thing about that is that ageism argument really just feels really defensive. I mean, really feels like. I mean, it's way better. I mean, their argument about this is like, whoa, dude, that's way not even like what the status quo war on drugs is like. It's pretty bad. And your argument back is like ageism. I mean, that feels like a massive.
So the reincarceration of black and brown youth and other people is not an impact?
That's status quo. Yeah, alt doesn't solve it.
Okay. Well.
Alt doesn't solve it. I mean, you don't even say it does. So, I mean, you've got to say that to some extent, and that's what I'm encouraging you to do. That's bad. Incarceration of black youth is bad, but it's like the same either way. Voting for you doesn't resolve that in the politics that I understand. So, I mean, I can pretty much end there because we discussed the uniqueness issue and impact issues and why I didn't vote on the argument. You win a bunch of disads, but no uniqueness.
I think that you need to do more framing throughout the debate of the alternative vis-a-vis the affirmative, or the way that the affirmative is positing it. And their discussion of if the plan is better than the status quo, then in my mind it's the negative's duty to either explain A, how the AF makes the world worse, or B, what an alternative framework is for an evaluation and like how to create a prior questioning into that. And I think that you have some tools that make hit on that makes it possible, but not adequately for me to go that way. I also think that the absence of a discussion of the alternative in regards to the AF and link arguments is problematic, and I think that Mick has discussed those. As a meta note, it would be helpful to confront the disparate impact portion of the affirmative a little bit more. I think that the affirmative uses it well to kind of dismiss some of the magnitude of the link, or diminish the magnitude of the link. And I think that it's also just a place that you can generate some offense. I think that this new AFS argument can be somewhat shortened, and then also tack on another portion of it, which is you don't just get to say that you legalize marijuana because it has a disparate impact, and then claim that spills over to every other sector or every other portion of law, and therefore the world is nearly perfect. I think that really kind of just points out some of the problems with the AF, and also takes out a lot of their no link arguments. The way I see it is you have three major link args: Taylor, Bracey, and the double turn. I think the Taylor arg that you're going for is that the plan makes racial profiling worse against.
I'm not talking about racism. Okay,
yeah, the plan would have a disproportionate impact on people that are underage, because that means that the law would just focus that direction. But that evidence just says that legalization would be no panacea, and I think that because the AF is kind of like, yes, the world is not perfect as per the end, but better than the status quo would be better. I think a more highlighted version of that AF, or version of that card, would be useful, because in ununderlined portions of the evidence, I think there's a lot more examples that could be ran with. And I'll skip a bunch of my discussion, unless you would like me to talk about it. I think that the other portion is the AF is making an argument that they are not value neutral, and that a disparate impact standard is something that would be able to resolve some of these things. So if the AF increases, if young people end up being prosecuted more for having weed post-plan, it's still better than the status quo, which is something that.
So stop and frisk in New York, should I just make those examples of those being more telling of how that weed hits the status quo?
I think, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but maybe an example of something that is legal for people, maybe even alcohol. And
so
how
maybe I should just be like, in Colorado, 21 up, kids still get thrown in shit, because I mean, okay.
Yeah, but framing that as being worse than the status quo would be super helpful, or having an alternative that's able to resolve all of it would be good. And then the double turn argument, maybe not disclosing. Oh, Bracey, I skipped that. Laws can be reversed, which is why the legal system is flawed. I don't really understand why that means the plan would be reversed, especially if they create a legal standard through which to evaluate future conflicts. I think developing this just further in context of the AF, and maybe making an application of the 2013 court decision towards what the AF would do would be helpful. Otherwise, I think this is a really long card that much of which is not unpackaged throughout the debate, but I think that is the most offensive link argument. Lastly, the double turn. Maybe not disclosing makes them bad dudes. I don't think that really deals with the argument that the focus of the plan should come first. I also don't really understand the double turn portion, because I don't think that they're making stasis arguments. And I think that maybe making this argument more brief and focused as to how they operationalize whiteness within debate, and then using that as a launching point for how you get your framework and alternative as a prior question to ideas of the AF would be super helpful.
Even as a
I
question,
mean, I felt like in terms of the Bracey convergence theory argument was sort of like white folks still hold the majority of power because they're still
also, they
right.
read the OE and why not
Like
card
we still like
too.
I felt like we extended that warrant.
Yes,
through the 1 hour and the 2
white
hour.
people are still in power. I don't understand how, this is the first portion of my RFD,
Okay.
how the alternative is able to resolve these things would be helpful. I think that it also speaks partially to Mick's decision. I think that there's some ways that you all can kind of create more time to explain these issues for me. And that is, because I think there's a couple places where you kind of you go for the trees at the cost of the forest. The double turn disclosure argument can be much shorter. I think that you are winning that there's a distinction between anti-blackness and racism, and I don't understand what the impact is that's so large that means that they lose, and I think that it can just be a shorter.
How about the whole gratuitous violence part of the 2 hour?
Yes, there's gratuitous violence.
How about the mystification?
Gratuitous violence isn't an impact.
These are impacts that I do not understand how an alternative resolves.
Yeah.
They talk about Gramsci. I don't know anything about Gramsci.
I don't go for it.
You don't go for it, but it's just like a thing that takes up time in the debate. And then like Mick said, them being wrong about Hudson. I think it's either something in the 2NR that you can just be like, I don't have to. I'm not reinventing the wheel. Move on. Or
that's what I did. I said.
Yeah, but then I'm just trying to give you some time-saving ideas, and then you spent maybe 20 seconds re-explaining.
Right, because I didn't trust that like now.
Well, if I judge you tomorrow night or Monday, you can be dismissive of arguments that are considered.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot to add. I'll just emphasize that, I mean, I think that the alternative question is important. I also just think that there's too much of the debate addresses the question of legalization and not enough of the debate addresses this disparate impact stuff. I mean, I think that you just need to cut off their internal link from getting to saying that this one policy becomes this to like, that's the mindset that everybody's gonna adopt. I mean, their evidence isn't the greatest evidence on the face of the earth on this question, but I do think that a lot of their disparate impact evidence is fairly well warranted as to why it would cause sort of different forms of confrontation with the history and structure of racial violence.
Why do you keep framing it through racial violence?
Well, I mean, first of all, a lot of your cards frame it through a question of racial violence.
That's why Sexton exists, to be like that.
Second of all, I'll be honest, in this debate, I don't understand what the difference between anti-blackness and racial violence is.
That's the problem with debate.
Well, I mean, how am I supposed to know?
You can research, you could talk
to
black people, you could, I'm sorry, it's okay.
Your argument right now is you didn't have to make an argument that people are supposed to vote on.
I mean, like, I do a lot of research. I think fairly hard about these issues, and I'm not saying that I'm perfect about it. But you know, that's not an argument that I think that you're explaining very well in this debate round, and you're not telling me why it matters and how it links to this disparate impact part of their AF, right? And I mean, that's what happens in the debate round. I don't really think that you have a very good comparative discussion of the impacts in this round, and I don't think that you have a good explanation of how the alternative can resolve the impacts that you do discuss. I mean, like, I do agree that you're winning, that there are definitely avenues by which a broader structure of violence can be re-articulated against particular forms of bodies, right? But I think that a lot of that is possible to do in the status quo under a regime that's a criminal regime, much more than one of legalization. So I mean, that's just like a comparative question. Obviously, if I understand the alternative better, I think that that's I think that you can resolve some of that.
I don't know how to explain the alternative better for people that don't have any grasp of what the distinctions are in this way. I don't know what to describe the alternative because the argument.
Well, I thought that
I don't know how to help white people. So help me help you.
I think it would be helpful if there's a point in the 2NC where you're just like, this is what the alternative is, and this is
vague. Help me help you.
Exactly. Have a chunk, a 45-second to a minute 15 chunk of the debate that is just dedicated to the alternative. Because I think that you have pieces of the alternative floating throughout the block, but there's not just one point where that I can point to and just be like, I can latch on to this idea of how it all functions in one large package.
Yeah, I don't think it's just this blackness versus race thing that's confusing us. I think that there's just like no point where you sit down and are like, this is what the alternative does. I don't think it's like that.
So like the pedagogy arguments that were made, the orientation arguments.
Yeah, but the pedagogy and the orientation arguments beg the question of what the effects of pedagogy and orientation are. Like, how does that spill up, out, and over, right?
So, I mean, the victimization DA, that was like the way in which they teach people means that you tell radical protesters in the back of the hood to go back home and do your shit again and recorrect miscible subjects isn't an impact.
Well, I mean,
more of that, maybe.
I mean, I think that first of all, I do think that that's sort of a good argument that needs to be expanded on more. The second thing is I think that I believe it's your Kawakami evidence that says we sort of become addicted to these legal solutions. You know, it talks about it prevents us from doing other types of things, but then it never, like, I don't know if it goes on in the rest of the article or what, but it doesn't talk about what those types of things are and why they can question the structure. And it seems to me that that's an entirely relevant question, especially with some of the critical race theory thesis that's been advanced. You know, whether it's interest convergence or the fact that the laws can be shifted based on the majoritarian control of the law, right? It begs the question of how you solve those things. And I think that at least the affirmative disparate impact evidence says that it forces the government and people who have to respond to demands against it to think historically and also to understand questions of anti-blackness, racism, racial profiling, etc. In terms of not just an actual intended form of discrimination, but in terms of structures. And that seems, and it also makes an argument about how that has a psychological effect as well. And I mean, that seems salient to this question of comparing how those two different things work. So more explanation of how that overcomes the structural violence that a lot of the rest of your evidence assumes. I think that that's a relevant question for me as a judge to be able to resolve at the end of the debate.
Can I give you a big piece of sort of tactical advice? So I've been on a couple of these splits now where I have voted this way and other people have voted the other way. And I mean, one thing you can do, of course, is decide that, you know, given the decision the three of us have made, that we don't decide debates correctly, and well, that's it for us. The other way to do that is to decide that this is a winnable debate for you, which I think everyone is telling you for our perspective, and realize that the difference between the decision I made in this debate and in other debates that's sort of similar is that a certain group of judges is like, I don't need to hear much about alternative debates in order to solve things. And the difference is, and you know, maybe I'm speaking on behalf of the dudes in blue collared shirt segment, but we need to hear about alternatives and how you solve it, and how you develop uniqueness for your turns, and how you solve the links to your stuff a lot more. And a higher focus on that tactically will give you a lot better advantage to really win the debate.
The entire point of Wilderson's argument, those alternatives don't make sense for that blue collar
Well, then that's something that's something you need to figure out. I mean, if you think it's just fundamentally inarticulable to me, then I mean, I can't help that. I mean, if Wilderson's argument and you believe that that's fundamentally inarticulable to me, then you know what the solution is. So, but I hope that's not true, and I don't think it is.
I think that the thing about the two items a little bit cavalier vis-a-vis extending the piece of evidence is hurts your opinion there. I think there's a piece of evidence that you probably thought you were extending that I didn't know.
You can't just roll.
But yeah.
So to make the spillover or like we're a different form of law argument more compelling, what do you think we need to do?
I'm not sure that you are a different form of law in the sense that they are, right? Like, because you're like, you have like a different legal jurisprudence, but it's not like you're like feminist jurisprudence where you're like the law needs to function differently. You just have a different legal standard, right? I mean, so there's different levels of jurisprudence. So when they're like, look, you're still equality and liberal rights framework, that's absolutely true. Your cards are like, we're law, we're liberal rights framework, and we're the law. Does that make sense? And so in some sense, you know, you're sort of spinning really hard and it's working and you win, you know? But like, I don't think you can be like, dude, we just totally aren't what they say, you know. I mean, so I think if they had applied their evidence a lot more specifically and been like, it said like that phrase and been like, you are a change of legal standard, which is probably like maybe a big deal, but fundamentally don't attack the nature of equality, and we're arguing that equality is impossible, which is a conceded premise on your part, kind of. You're kind of in big trouble. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I guess hypothetical. I spend a lot of time in the block on this Rodriguez evidence, and it's just like I didn't how would you have felt about this? We got to the point in the prison industrial complex where it is today because of reform. Or do you think that their reform would be a different move than that?
So it's almost like there's two ships passing in the night, and I would have to look at both pieces of evidence to resolve it. Because they're also talking about how ending the war on drugs means that the prison industrial complex is unavailable.
That's fair.
I think that it's a good sort of. I mean, it does work for you, but I don't know whether they're prison reform, right? They're not saying that they're not saying that we need to make prisons better or make the conditions in prisons better, in the sense that I think the Rodriguez evidence is talking about.
Okay,
but.
Alright.
chance that I cannot judge you again statistically.